this is obviously a huge issue, but is it something that, you've been interested in for a long time? And when did you get interested in politics then, actually?
Well, I think I've always been quite political, but you may find it slightly surprising. At university, I was a very big environmental activist.
Yeah. Now, I've heard a little bird told me that you were in Extinction Rebellion. Is
yes,
that right?
I was.
But I'm sorry, actually. So, which university was that then?
So I went to Cambridge. So I matriculated in 2018. As soon as I joined, first thing I did was join up to a group called Cambridge Zero Carbon, and it was essentially Extinction Rebellion, but as a university society. So I spent a lot of time going on marches, being really involved in kind of left-leaning student politics. So I've always been political, but my political opinions have evolved. I was a very big supporter of Jeremy Coburn. I was absolutely devastated the night he lost the election. I actually described it as being one of the worst nights of my life.
Really?
Yes. So
that's quite a journey in a short space of time.
Yes, it is, I suppose. But there have been certain things that I've always been populist. I've always supported Brexit, for one. I consider myself to be a Lexiteer, but I've always supported that. I've always backed people I've considered to be anti-establishment, insurgents, people offering something fresh to British government. I've never liked the kind of Westminster lobby types. I think they are at fault for a lot of the decline we've seen in the last couple of decades. So I have jumped, certainly, in
was it like in being in the environmentalist movement, Extinction Rebellion? Because it is pretty much always in the news now, but we've just had this incident with one of the activists,
Captain Tom,
yes, defiling the monument to Captain Tom with excrement. I mean, did you meet people like that?
It's funny that you mentioned this, because I've kind of been thinking about this in the past couple of days. And I was seeing this back when I was doing my activism. So this was a couple of years ago. It would have been about 2018, 2019. And what you were seeing were increasingly groups were splitting away from mainstream environmental groups like Extinction Rebellion. And they wanted something more radical. And what you have to understand of the mindset of these people, and myself at that time, when you are being told the world is going to end, you start to think, well, if the world's going to end, why are we just faffing about on a bridge somewhere, blocking cars? We should be doing something far more extreme. Now, prior to 2001, the 9/11 attacks, the most monitored terrorist groups were environmental groups. They were considered to be the greatest threat. Then for a few decades, it was the threat of Islamist terrorism. But I think in the next decade or so, we're going to start to see environmental terrorism going back to the top. So I think that particular example of the obviously very mentally disturbed young woman doing that protest against protest, if you can even call it that, I think you're going to start to see more, radicalized people in the environmental movement who are going towards these more extreme, kind of dark corners. And I think the government should be deeply, deeply concerned about this.
It's interesting you say that actually if you're a young person and you are told all the time the world's going to end, so actually, that pretty much legitimizes extreme action. Was that it? That was obviously presumably your motivation, but also people around you as well? I mean, people you're growing up with, did it have that same effect on them?
I think it takes a certain type of personality to be so taken up in this. But I would say if you talk to, anybody really of my generation or a little bit younger, they will have these very apocalyptic visions of the future. Now, what I will say, in defense of my generation, the leadership of all of these movements are very old. So when I was actually walking over a few hours ago, I saw that around Westminster, the streets had been blocked off by Just Stop Oil protesters. And every single one of them had silver hair. They were all over the age of 60. Now, if you look at the anti-fracking protesters, same thing, all over 60. The idea that this is like a grassroots movement coming out from young people, that's not necessarily true. Young people have a right to be concerned about, the future of the world and the future of this government. But the people who are leading a lot of this wacky stuff, that's not my generation.
They actually seems more of a class thing to me. They seem to be pretty solidly middle class. Actually.
Yeah, I would say middle class, middle-aged, perhaps underemployed, too much time on their hands. I mean, that goes for pretty much all activists. But yeah, I do think, the more radicalised fish, of course you're going to see younger people. That's going to be, the young people who are getting swept up in this. And I think it's really sad, it's really sad.
Yeah, what is it? I mean, yes, if that was what you were doing, do you not believe in any of it at all now, in the environmentalist thing, or what's your position now?
I think the problem is environmentalism is a very, very complex issue. And I think it's the sort of thing that it will have a technocratic solution. It is not the sort of thing that you as an ordinary person have much sway over, because by its very nature, it is transnational. It is extremely complex. It is dealing with the levers of international capital and finance. It's not something that you can even start to address by, recycling or marching down the street with a megaphone and, calling on the government. I mean, to do what? This is such a complex issue that I think it's quite concerning that already you're starting to see the electorate turn against, green options, because you've got this insane leadership, like someone like Roger Hallam, who used to lead Extinction Rebellion, people that are gluing themselves outside the Houses of Parliament or blocking roads. Everyone just thinks, well, these are just a bunch of silly middle-class hippies. I'm not going to pay attention to them. But these are, it's a real issue. It's going to impact us all. But it should be left to government. It shouldn't be, left to these extremely left-wing activists who are using it as a package to push for very left-wing policies.
Yeah, I mean, my experience anyway of just the Greens actually was that in fact they were more left-wing than Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, that old saying, what is it, watermelons, red on the inside.
Yes.
Essentially, a lot of Marxists went off into this area, and took on a different mantle. Do I take it then that you're not, for example, in agreement about, say, net zero, or...
Well, net zero is going to be disastrous for the average man on the street. It is going to be absolutely disastrous for the average man on the street. I think, one of the massive problems of the environmentalist movement has been the turn away from nuclear energy. And it frustrates me to no end. And it's because people have accepted that decline is inevitable. We've basically said the only way we're going to be able to deal with all of these problems is by shrinking the economy, shrinking our power on the international stage, and essentially just giving up, And that's not just an environmentalist thing. That's, I think, the dominant mindset of your average, state official today is decline. There's no idea of taking, control, taking the mantle and actually pushing for pro-growth, green growth, but actual green growth. No talk about nuclear energy, no talk about actually dealing with China or India, actually really cracking down on it. It's just, well, we're going to have to scale everything back. Yeah. And the next generation is going to have to accept being poorer. And they won't, they simply won't. You can't expect to have another generation of Conservative voters if they are just being, left out in the cold, which is, this is what's happening.